Good evening, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. I hope you guys are doing well. In this one, we're going to be addressing a big elephant in the room at this point, and we didn't touch up on it yesterday because we were thinking the severe weather threat would be a little bit more prevalent than what it is, but in case you didn't see my post from earlier this morning, we've downgraded to a marginal risk and really trending towards there being less of a risk there from even a marginal threat, I would say. The dynamics with that system has been downtrending over the last few days, and we're continuing to see it even on this last run. So I'm going to address the real elephant in the room, and that's been the winter side of this upcoming system, and what more than likely will end up being named Winter Storm Olive or Olive, whichever pronunciation makes you feel better, go for it. Anyway, that being said, let's go ahead and dig into things here. So this is what we could be looking at as we head towards tomorrow morning into Tuesday. This is a probability forecast for areas that could see up to about an inch plus of snow. The further we get into the red color here, the higher the probability. We start out with the yellow going all the way up to green, and then the highest being the dark red, which is 95%. And look how widespread that is. That goes through a large portion of the western half of the U.S. and even the northern plains. We can see very high probability of seeing above an inch of snow. And this even translates all the way up to 2 and even 4 inches of snow for a lot of regions here. And this is over the next 24 hours. We have multiple days of snow ahead for a lot of these regions here. This is just looking towards the 22nd. Let's go ahead and jump this to the 23rd, and we'll still see those probabilities in abundance for a large part of the U.S. Look at that. From the Rockies all the way towards the New England region. Almost I would call this extreme confidence in the potential of seeing above an inch of snow, which is unbelievable. And again, it also translates into 2 inches and even 4 inches. 4 inches starts to diminish a little bit more so towards the northeast, mainly going to be centered around the plains, but even so, these are pretty impressive numbers, to say the least. So this is not something to mess around with. So this is going to be a big-time snowstorm coming in. This has been shown for the last few days, and if anything, I think this has been uptrending. So this is what we're pretty much going to be focusing from this point onward. Not to say that marginal risk is to be slept on, but considering the fact that we have such a vigorous looking system on the way, this is to be watched closely. Also want to note that there probably already is some snow falling right now. I don't have radar Omega up at the time. So yeah, unfortunately I'm not able to look right now, or maybe I am. Just give me a second. All right, so we got radar Omega up. A little earlier it was giving me a little trouble, but I think the computer was just being a little stubborn. But that being said, we can see a little bit of snowfall starting to initiate across Montana. Areas like Billings, Missoula, Shelby, you guys are getting light snow, but we will be anticipating this picking up through the overnight hours and especially into tomorrow. We see widespread winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories, and even a few blizzard warnings with this, by the way. So we're going to be keeping an eye towards these regions first, and then we could see some of these blizzards conditions possibly even extending a little further to the east. We'll get a little bit more detailed with that in just a minute, especially with the wind speeds. But yeah, this is the overall picture of the winter weather situation that we could be dealing with, pretty much from the west coast all the way to the Great Lakes. Winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories are in effect and in full force. So that being said, also I want to actually go ahead and talk about some of the conditions we could see. There is potential for some winds to even reach up to about 75 miles an hour across some of these regions here, especially over towards the Rockies. This is expected for an area around Rock Springs and Green River. Snow accumulations up to almost a foot to maybe even 14 inches possible and winds gusting as high as 65 miles per hour. To put that in perspective for you, that is the equivalent of a tropical storm, a very strong tropical storm at that. And then on top of that, the wind chills are going to be absolutely ridiculous with these temperatures. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at those then. So we'll start out, we're pretty much going to be looking at the Euro on this one for the most part for the temperatures and a couple other parameters, but for the most part, the models are in pretty good agreement. The ice storm is a different story, and we're going to get more in depth in that probably in tomorrow's video, because really the icy conditions aren't going to be expected more or less until I'd say Wednesday. So we have enough time to get prepared for that in advance. So with the increased threat of snow and ice across a large portion, especially over towards this area, I hate to say it, but, and I normally don't condone doing this, but anywhere in this region in particular, and even areas to the north, go on and get the bread and milk. I hate to say it. I really don't condone that kind of stuff at all, but this looks pretty rough. This looks like it's going to be a pretty rough one, so I don't want to misguide you, but yeah, I think if you haven't already, go on and get that bread and milk. Anyway, this is what we're looking at right now with the Euro as far as temperatures. Cold air starting to sneak in. Cold air is already in place across a good portion of the northwest, especially towards the mountainous regions. And we'll see that frigid air really start to kick in as we get into Tuesday afternoon. And this is when I think the snowfall rates will also start to pick up, because we do have a very impressive amount of precipitable water available across this region. So as this goes on, we see those cold temperatures really start to dig in. And this is also where we start to see things get really interesting as we head into Wednesday evening. This Wednesday afternoon, see, here's that freezing line right there, and right across this region here where we see these mid to upper 30s, that's where that ice is going to start to develop right here as we get into the course of the day there. We have that system with the limited severe potential, but it's still going to be advecting moisture as we go onward. I did not mean to click that sounding, but you can see that we have that more. Why is it doing that? That is so weird. Why does it keep doing that? Okay, I figured that out now. But what we can see here is we have temperatures in the 30s and 40s here. We have the cold temperatures right here. The moisture is going to be advecting from the Gulf, and it's going to have a pretty good return far to the north. We can even go ahead and take a look at the dew points in just a minute here. But with those increased dew points, and it doesn't take much for wintry weather, this can easily turn into a mess right here, and that's actually what we will be expecting. So we'll go ahead and move this forward, and this area is going to persist as time goes on, even into the weekend. So as we head, well, not into the weekend, towards Thursday and even into Friday, we have to keep a close eye on the parts of the northeast here, especially towards the Long Island region, as we could see a mixture of wintry precip and maybe towards the end switching towards rain. So let's go ahead and now take a look at those dew points, and we'll go from there, because this is going to be a very telling parameter as to what's to come. So we'll jump ahead to about OOZ on Wednesday. It's really Tuesday night. And you can see the moist sector right here. It's across the southeast. It's a setup for this severe weather. But look how far, again, like I said before, look how far that moisture return goes. We even have pretty sufficient dew points towards the 60s, even in Illinois and Iowa. So as we get later into the day, like look right here. If you get those dew points really in the 30s and 40s, you can end up seeing wintry precipitation. Because one thing to note is, the cooler the air is, the drier it often tends to be. So that's why we often end up marveling, like a lot of meteorologists or weather nerds like myself will end up marveling at cold core setups, because it's hard to get those high moisture value returns around that kind of setup. And while this isn't a cold core setup, obviously, fact in the matter is the moisture return is so immense to the south of that freezing line that there could be pretty hefty ice totals across this region here. So anywhere I would say across this corridor, if I can get this sounding to not pop up, anywhere across this corridor here. I'm trying to get the pin to pop up, but anywhere across this region here particularly, I think there is a very high chance of seeing up to maybe a 1/4 inch of ice, just based off of what I'm seeing here. Could see locally higher amounts too, but we'll see how things trend from there. So now that we've looked at that, we'll continue to see that line or that contrast point continue to shift more so towards the east, and we'll start to see it diminish as we head into Thursday night into Friday morning, but not before unleashing a little bit more ice across this region over here. Let's say New England, Long Island, this region here. So we'll be keeping an eye. So these two regions here are going to be what we keep a close eye on. Pretty much anywhere right around Chicago, or even areas a little further to the south of that. I know this was a crappy circle that I just drew, but bear with me, I'm not great at this yet. But that's pretty much those are the two areas we're going to be looking at for the increased threat of freezing rain and ice accumulation. So now that we've seen that, let's go ahead and take a look at all three of the models and get an idea of just what exactly we could be dealing with here. For the most part, there's a good bit of agreement. There are some tiny little details that are different with each model. All of them are ran a little bit differently, have different doctrines, or basically different supercomputers. But here we go. Look, this is heading towards Wednesday afternoon or late Wednesday morning. Here's that rain snow line, and there's that ice starting to develop here. And here's when things really start to pop off as we get into Wednesday evening. You can see pretty much from Iowa all the way towards New York, we're right on the fringe between rain and snow. We watch this really start to develop around this low that pops up here as we head into early Thursday morning. And as we head into Thursday afternoon, there's going to be what looks to be two waves that pops up here. One saving grace that might exist across the Long Island region is, for the most part, I think the surface temperatures are going to stay above freezing. Towards the upper levels might be a different story, but again, we'll get into that a little bit more in depth tomorrow. Then, just as we think it's over, heading into Thursday evening, here comes a second wave that pops up. And this time, the temperatures do dip below freezing. And this could allow a lot more of the wintry precip to stay, so it makes this forecast a little bit more complicated. The final totals that we'll end up seeing from this are going to be really interesting. So here is the Canadian temperatures are going to be identical. There's our flashpoint right there as we head into Wednesday evening. A little bit sharper contrast with the Canadian model, but nonetheless, the result's going to be all the same. And so on and so forth. We'll go ahead and switch this over to precip because the moisture return is actually almost identical. That's one thing that I am liking about what I've been seeing with these models. There's been pretty good consistency between them in the last couple of days in regards to this wintry precipitation threat. One thing, like I said, there's small little details here that are different. Like, for example, with the Canadian, the rain snow line is a little bit further north. Not by much, but it is there. And then on top of that, that second round is also there. But that second round ends up kind of sliding a little further to the south. So that's one other key detail that's to be noted. We look at the GFS. Similar look to the Canadian. Almost identical, I would say. And then it's pretty much the same deal. That cold air sneaks in a little later as we head into Friday. We look at the actual precip rate and type, and it's going to be a little bit closer to the Canadian. The GFS and the Canadian often end up being pretty similar in nature most of the time. Same time frame. Although, interestingly enough, with the GFS, as I mentioned before, detail is that this will start out a little further west. This still has a outcome where we could see limited severe weather, but this also has a really strong ice return, especially towards southern Michigan here. And then a really strong ice return just around or in even New York City as we head into Thursday morning. So we'll have to watch that. The second round comes in. Snow's a little bit, the rain snow line ends up being a little bit further to the north, and as a result, this bears New York City. So, like I said, a lot of moving details here with this forecast. It's going to be tricky to really hammer down who's going to end up getting the greatest snow and ice totals here. Well, more so the ice totals. We're pretty confident on who gets the highest snow totals. So that being said, here is a look at an interesting feature that I've just really started playing around with on Pivotal Weather. This is the 24-hour snowfall total rate. So this is what we could be expecting over the next 24 hours. Starting out, of course, this is starting out west. Highest totals so far leaning more so towards Montana, of course. Wyoming gets into the action a good bit, and I think this is where we end up seeing the highest total, where we in one of the mountains here we get up to about 25 inches. It's a little over 2 feet. Oh wait, there's a little spot over here towards Washington where we can see that as well. So there's a couple little pockets, but mainly this is going to be in the higher elevations in the mountains. When we go to 36 hours out, we got to also do the model comparison. But starting out, it's going to be a lot of agreement between these models here. Once we get closer to about maybe 60 hours out, things are going to get more interesting, especially as we'll start to lose the short-range models or convective models like the HRRR here, for example. So similar look. A little bit more aggressive on the snowfall totals, which I find interesting. These convective models can be real wild cards in giving us our totals, so to speak. For the most part, as we look at 30 hours out, it's a pretty similar deal. Bullseyes are going to be mainly across the mountainous terrains, but the valleys will start to become more prevalent as time goes on. So this is what we're dealing with Tuesday night heading into Wednesday. It's the NAM 3 kilometer here. Even more aggressive than the HRRR. One spot here even getting up to about 30 inches. There's a spot over here where we get up to about almost 4 feet of snow over towards the mountains of Washington here. And then we do see an interesting little pocket that develops right here across New York City where we could get up to about 2 to 3 inches. And I don't see any of the other models really aiming towards that. Euro comes the closest, but even then I think it's a little further north of the city. But the NAM 3 kilometer has New York City in line for maybe a couple inches of snow. And also the NAM itself has a similar look, slightly more aggressive even, where we get to about 4 inches. So move this to 36 hours out, and for the most part, most of the wintry precip is going to stay based around the western half of the country. And it's not really until we jump this up to about 48 hours out where we start to see a lot more movement. We see this pocket of snow start to develop here where we could get up to about 6 to 8 inches pretty easily across parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. Widespread totals now of about 8 inches plus across the entire state of Wyoming. Colorado's getting into the mix here. Highest elevations are going to be the big winners, of course, there. Utah's getting slammed too. We could see at least 1 to 2 feet in some of the more northern parts of the state here. Not to mention mountainous terrain, of course, too. Higher totals are likely. Then now we're also starting to see the Sierras getting into play here. And we're starting to see big totals there, 1 to 2 feet probable over there. And then we're seeing this little small shortwave system get out of the northeast at this point. That's what the Euro shows us. It's the Canadian showing a similar look. Values are about the same, actually, I would say. Actually, a little bit stronger over towards Minnesota. Then we look at the GFS. Totals are actually weaker on this one. I usually expect the GFS to be one of the more aggressive model runs, but in this one, we seem to be pretty mild as it stands right now. We look at the HRRR. This has been really aggressive, actually, I would say. Up to about 30 inches of snow in some places towards southern Wyoming here. This definitely leans into the Rockies around Colorado in particular. And then also around Denver even, we're going to have to watch you extra close because HRRR even has you guys getting up to about 10 inches plus of snow. That's a pretty big storm for you guys possibly. And when we look at the NAM has, look at the difference. I mean, NAM has Denver maybe getting about 2 inches of snow versus 10 to 11 from the HRRR. So like I said, a lot going on here. Then as we look at, I can't get my words out, but Minnesota here, we could see up to a foot possibly across that region. And very similarly, we could see that heading into parts of Wisconsin. Slightly lighter totals for the Rockies. Could be still some pockets where we could get up to about 2 feet. NAM just seems a little less aggressive than some of the other model runs here. The 3 kilometer NAM also a little less aggressive than what we were seeing in the previous run up to about 36 hours out. And then we'll jump this to 60. This is where we start to lose the HRRR. We still got the NAM models in play here. And now we see that little snow sleeve expand further and further out to the east now. Central Michigan easily getting up to about 6 to 9 inches. Almost a foot possible across almost all of central Wisconsin. And then now we're starting to get into New York, parts of the Adirondacks where we could see up to about an inch or two within the course of Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Totals around the Sierras and the Rockies will start to drop off at this point. But we still have a lot of variance between the models here. The Canadian shows a slightly more aggressive look, higher totals, of course, but that's what we've been trending for a minute here as far as this model's concerned. GFS is a little bit lighter, but there is a pocket over here towards south central Michigan where we could get up to about a foot plus. And then there's a big pocket of heavy snow that the GFS has been hot on for a minute, developing across South Dakota and into southern Minnesota here. Snowfall totals over towards the northeast get a little bit more aggressive, more widespread 1 to 2 inches, and even a pocket of 3 to 4 inches plus possible here too. This is looking at the NAM. NAM's pretty aggressive across South Dakota and across some of the southern range of the Rockies here, where we could get up to about almost 3 feet of snow in some places. And this even gets a little bit further south now when we look at areas like Arizona and parts of New Mexico even. So it's an interesting look there. Convective NAM, the 3 kilometer, pretty similar deal. No surprises there. And then last but not least, we'll go ahead and just jump this all the way to 78 hours out. This should be right around where we see the end of this snow system. So this is Thursday night into Friday morning. Another big pocket of snow here across the Great Lakes, stretching back towards Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin. And then we're starting to see the Northeast really become a big player in some of the grand snowfall totals, or the grand scheme of the snowfall totals here. Big pocket where we could see maybe even up to a foot across New Hampshire, Vermont, and some of the vineyards. When we look at the Canadian, we're actually starting to look a little bit weaker on this than we did before. So it's going to be interesting to see how this ends up trending as we close in on this event. Look at the GFS. It's a smaller pocket, mainly around the higher elevations where we could see up to a foot. But look at this pocket that develops here across parts of Minnesota, mainly looking closer towards maybe Minneapolis. We could see maybe 2 feet. I think that's a little bit bold, but we'll see what happens with that. And then we're looking at the traditional NAM as we're now starting to get out of range of all the short range models. Still a little pocket here, but a much smaller one where we could see up to about 2 feet towards central Minnesota. Higher elevations, of course, across the Northeast getting higher totals. And then last but not least, we'll just stretch this out all the way to 90 hours. Where we're mainly looking at the big three here. This is heading into Friday morning. Still could see some higher totals across some parts of the Great Lakes towards the UP and Michigan in particular, maybe up to a foot, according to the Euro. Snowfall, the new snow system should be starting to come in around the end of the week across this region here, so we'll have to keep an eye on that as well. And really from this point, all three of the models are in pretty good agreement. GFS is the most aggressive of the three so far. This next system looks like it might be a little bit more oriented towards Northern California too. So just as the southern part of the Sierras got a lot of action, the northern part here looks like it's going to be your turn shortly. But that's what we have going on with the snowfall. Let's go ahead and then take a look at the ice overall. When we look at the ice, main area I'm interested in particular is going to be across, like I said, this corridor right here between Iowa and all the way up towards Lake Erie, or in between Lakes Erie and Ontario, where we could see some higher ice totals up to about maybe an inch, quarter inch of ice, maybe even more. Now, these totals right here might be a little bit overdone, but I'm not going to rule them out just yet. It'd be devastating to see these totals, though, where we're getting up to about 3/4 inches of ice. I'm definitely thinking a quarter inch is possible, though. So now we'll go ahead and look at the Canadian. Really bold on the totals. We already have been seeing how the Canadian's been trending here, so going to try to hope for the best here and hope that doesn't occur. GFS is really aggressive with this. I don't like that look at all. Canadian, the NAM are going to be pretty aggressive with this. 3 kilometer NAM should be a little bit better. Oops, I did not mean to go back that far. Geez, I'm trying to remember where my placement is. But okay, 48 hours out. No, I've completely lost my spot here. Okay, so this is what we were looking at with the GFS. Okay, this is where we were, 54 hours out. Sorry about that, you guys. It's a long video. I often seem to get a little sloppy towards the end. Just clicked the wrong button. But it's the GFS showing something really aggressive. And then HRRR, this is where things kind of get a little bit wacky, where we see these little pockets develop across the higher elevations. No surprises there, but this rain-snow line gets pushed a little bit further north on this one. Can't be ruled out given the manner in which we have that moisture and warmth return, but I don't think it's going to make it that far north. We look at the NAM, we're back in excuse me, we're back in a more probable outlook in comparison to the other models here, where we could see up to about maybe quarter inch. Some areas are starting to flirt with half an inch ice here as well. Then as we start to look further off towards the northeast, we see some pockets here where we can get up to about a quarter inch, maybe even 3/10 of an inch. And then the NAM's 3 kilometer actually looks really well defined in this situation. Has that ice even stretching as far back as maybe Omaha, Nebraska here even, and parts of even southern Nebraska, which is interesting. But there's a couple of big pockets right here, like say towards Iowa, where we could get close to that half-inch mark, which is really dangerous. And then the same can be said over towards Wisconsin. I accidentally clicked the sounding. Let's go ahead and actually take a look at that. So best guess to the precip type, freezing rain. And here is where things get interesting, where when we take a look at our sounding here, the air temperatures in the red. and the dew point is in the green. Dew point not that impressive, of course, or actually it is impressive given how cold the air is. But look what happens when we head towards this 850 millibar region, which is the low-level jet part of the atmosphere, so to speak. Normally, I talk about this area when it comes to tornadoes, but whenever you see this happen here, where you see that air temperature do something like that, that's where the air is getting a little bit warmer above the surface, and that's why we aren't getting snow across this region. Because what's happening is we have our precip falling more so as freezing rain, but right around this region, we're starting to flirt with that area being just above freezing right across here. And what ends up happening is that snowflake melts into a raindrop, and then as it gets back towards the surface here, we end up seeing ultimately a raindrop that hits the ground, freezes on contact, and there you have it. We have freezing rain. That being said, this is a very prevalent situation across here, and there's high likelihood that this will end up being a pretty impressive ice storm across this region. Same can be said across parts of Michigan, where we could still see up to 3/4 of an inch. And then across the northeast here around Great Lakes, we could see some potential freezing rain here up to about maybe 2/10 of an inch, flirting with that 1/4 inch mark. Last but not least, we have the blend of models, which is the most conservative of all the models. Also takes a look at all the models and creates a medium. So far, nothing here getting up to that 1/4 inch mark yet. Let's hope that this outcome ends up occurring, because that will make for a less impactful ice event. It'll be interesting to see how the blend of models trends. We'll be updating that tomorrow. This one was going to be a long video. I've warned you guys in the post, so yeah. But that being said, I hope you did enjoy this video. Hopefully you found it useful. If you did, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Do the double click if you haven't as well. And share this video to anyone that could be in the affected areas, as this might be very useful to them. But that's all I got tonight. I'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon for sure. Until that next video, this has been Metalhead Weatherman. Take care. Have a good night.